And so you can already tell that was just a recipe for disaster. Stress from not being able to keep up in school, wanting to please everybody and, being willing to compromise my own moral compass for the sake of, praise and approval. So inevitably, I experienced like a mental breakdown.
What's your name and where are you from?
My name is Micah Dailey White, and I am from California, specifically Riverside, California. Well, I was born in Las Vegas, but the majority of my life I've lived in Riverside, California.
When did you come to Kalamazoo?
It's been broken into segments. I initially found out about Kalamazoo through the scholarship program that I was a part of called the Posse Foundation. They chose the school, Kalamazoo College, for me. And so that's how I was introduced to Kalamazoo. But as far as the actual culture and, why I'm here, that has a lot to do with, my introduction to the music scene here. Thanks to the brother Henry, or, as many of you know him as Headband Henry, Headband Henny, to be correct, but to be exact. Met with him in Kalamazoo College, like on campus in the game room. And, he was a mutual of a friend. We shared a mutual. His name was Abraham. And he pretty much networked me with Henry. And we got to talk about music. And, Henry was able to tell me about, the music culture here. And that was my first introduction. And then he was able to book me my first ever performance, which was Sounds of the Zoo back in 2022. And that was my introduction to the scene, which helped me to fall in love with the community, which when I was met with the decision of like where I wanted to go in life, how I wanted to start my young adult, experience, Kalamazoo was my first pick. I felt as though it was a nice, healthy mix demographically with young adults, older adults. It's like a nice, healthy mix. And also, it's just more affordable. It's just more affordable than California.
Yeah, way more than Riverside.
Oh, yeah. Most definitely.
So you were born in Riverside. How long were you there?
I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I was there from birth until age 7. And then in 2009, I moved to California, lived in Compton / San Pedro for a while. But then in 2011, I moved in with my aunt and uncle in Riverside, California. And I was with them up until 2023. I lived with them up until 2023 and moved to Kalamazoo in 2024.
Okay. Awesome.
Yep. But yeah, so here I am now, in Satellite Records. It's a nice local record store here in Kalamazoo.
Shout
out
a part of the culture. For letting us do it here.
Shout out to Satellite Records. Shout out to Bunny. And yeah, man, it's a very surreal experience, because there was a time where I was, in Kalamazoo College, and I would hear about, the Vine. I would hear about the music culture, but I didn't know how to gain access to it up until meeting Henry. Yeah.
I love the community here. There's so many just weirdos that just are so passionate about art and music and poetry and all the cool stuff.
Right. Oh yeah, most definitely. And that's another thing about Kalamazoo, specifically Kalamazoo's art, the culture here. It's very diverse. It is just a canvas of all avenues of art, from, painters and sculptors, musicians, writers, poets. And it is a scene, and it is something that I've always wanted to be involved in. I wanted to be around, the more artistic types. And, we even have a basement, a live basement scene here, that is a novelty in today's, social climate. It's bands from Canada come to Kalamazoo just to tour and perform in, one of our basements in the neighborhood, and that is really cool. That is that's inspiring. Yeah,
I love it. Some of the best bands I've seen are cramped into a cobweb-filled, dusty basement, but you get just the raw experience of seeing the band live.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Sometimes all they bring is one amp,
Yep.
and sometimes they bring in what appears to be just an entire experience, and
Lights and smoke.
lights,
And
smoke. They wear nice and like extravagant costumes and meticulous costumes, and I'm like, wow, it's truly something to like look at. It's something that is very, in all the best ways, like perplexing, because I was so used to just seeing that over like media. I never thought that I would like come in contact, let alone like be a part of this. Now that I am, it's like there's a lot of identity that I see. When it comes to me pursuing art, there's a lot of like my artistic identity that I can see that's like reflective of what's around me, environment wise.
I love it. So could we rewind just a little bit to when you're living in California, you're a young man. So what were some of your musical influences? Who introduced you to the music you love today?
Well, I got my foundation. My foundation is rooted in Motown. I grew up in a Christian household, so certain genres like, rock and hip hop weren't as like, you can imagine my parents weren't as enthusiastic about those genres than they were with, what were deemed as safer genres like Motown and, pop and soul, which I understood. So naturally, I fell in love with, the Marvin Gayes and the Temptations and, the Four Tops and Stevie Wonder. And
great music.
that was my foundation. And even before I lived with my uncle, both sides of my family with, my mother and my father, we really appreciate music and we really are sensitive to music. Like we take music very seriously. My mother was a huge Michael Jackson fan. So you could probably with that fact, you could tell, pretty sure that answered a lot of people's questions. Like, where's he getting? My mom was a huge Michael Jackson fan to like the extent of being like a Michael Jackson impersonator too.
Oh, wow.
So, it seemed as though it was almost fate that I would like the guy, to the point where I'm wearing his glasses, the Ray-Ban wings, something about him, something about that era I really liked. And, my love for music, I would say, began at a very young age, at a very early age. But my love for art, apparently, it has always been around. My late grandmother on my mom's side, she was an artist. She was a painter. So I would find myself attracted to her room. And anytime she was in there, she would usually either be watching something on television or she'd be painting. And I would just sit there and just kind of like soak it all up, not knowing that like my interests were developing. Just watching my grandmother paint, watching one of my uncles play the bass. I love the bass. That's my favorite instrument. But sitting around, those individuals, family, and really just like I said, like soaking it all in and internalizing, why am I drawn to this? And then the older I get and the more I understand, the more I can perceive like reality and what's all around me, I'm like, I really like that song, or I really like that art piece, but why? And I'm like, okay, it reminded me of it probably goes back, as far as, my times with my granny and, my uncle, both my late granny, my late uncle. So yeah, but we've all been pretty much surrounded by soul, pop, funk, R&B. But where it stands right now, I'm open to music in general. Like I find myself, the Police, they're my favorite band. So they're definitely not, soul, Motown, R&B, but at the end of the day, music is music.
The Police are a great band.
I love the Police. I just love how technical they are and, just melodies. I love melody. I love really good melodies. So that's when you really appreciate melody, then you can kind of glide over music. You can gloss over music and appreciate whatever from whatever, circle or whatever, corner of music. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So when did you start getting into like creating your own music? Did you start as a singer, or did you learn an instrument at an earlier age?
What I remember, what I can remember about, my youth is I used to always beatbox.
Oh, cool.
I just figured out, I love music and I love making music, but obviously when you're a kid, you don't know, you can't just pick up FL Studio. I mean, some can, and I'm amazed by that. But, for those who I didn't even have access to a computer, like a personal computer, until I was well into like my late teens. So, but I still wanted to make music. And so I started beatboxing, and beatboxing helps with understanding melody, understanding rhythm, obviously. But I remember first, messing with music production in middle school when I would go to the computer lab during like the after school program during activity time. And I would go on the computer and go on this website called Soundtrap, which was like this online digital audio workstation. And I'm just like, I just vividly remember trying to figure out, like, they didn't have keyboards, so I had to use the computer's keyboard to like make music.
Oh, wow.
So the Q key would equate to like, I don't know, D on the piano. So, once I started figuring out like, okay, if that's D and this is A, then I was able to start like messing around, making chords, using samples. But I was in middle school, so like when everybody else was like playing Minecraft or, they were on Cool Math or like playing video games, I was over here just like, this is my video game right here, making music. And also too, my father buying me a keyboard for the first time. And it felt as though a lot happened that kind of happened all at once, because at the same time that I was picking up Soundtrap, my dad had bought me a keyboard, and around the same time that my father bought me a keyboard, I just hyperfixated on the movie Ray with Jamie Foxx, and who, Ray Charles, who's pretty much considered to be like the genius of music, which the way he was able to blend genres. I think I liked the movie, but subconsciously I was being inspired by the movie because I never went to school for music. I would just mimic what I was hearing, being played on like Ray Charles tracks, like what I say. So I would be like 14, 13, just like moving like him, singing his songs like him. I remember it would be funny. Like I went to this one department store, like it was called Savers. It was pretty much like a Goodwill type store. And they had like a functioning keyboard. So I remember like, my aunt, she would go around the shop, and I sat at that keyboard and started playing like Hit the Road Jack by Ray Charles. And then there was like this crowd of like older individuals who I could see on their face, they were like, why is this kid singing a Ray Charles song on a Warren keyboard in the Savers? It just kind of threw people off. And but that's what I really liked. That's what I was drawn to, man.
It's cool how music can kind of bring people together and kind of pause people for a moment out of their lives.
Right. Oh yeah, most definitely. It's music is one of the most powerful forces in, I won't necessarily say the universe because I don't know what's out there, but as far as, when it comes to humanity, it is one of the most powerful forces. It is, in every way, shape, and form, it is a type of, I'm not going to say like a religion, but it is something that can cause people to congregate and assemble and like experience something that you don't usually typically experience outside of, that environment, people who just feel as though they can dance freely, people who feel as though they can like conversate while the music is playing in the background. So, it is a very powerful tool. So, with great power comes great responsibility, right? You know what I mean?
True. True. So, we got a little bit into middle school. How about high school? Did you focus more on your music then? Were you in band or anything like that?
I would take certain classes. I would take piano. I remember taking piano, beginners instruments, but I don't know. I can honestly say I never felt as though those classes helped. And I don't want to come across as like arrogant when I say this or boastful, but I feel as though there are types of intelligence, and then there are those who like they learn simply by application. They're like kinesthetic learners. So rather than like, sit down and read a book about it and take notes about it and then practice on the side, my thought process was, if I have a keyboard, I could just play until the synapses in my brain kind of like connect, and I'm like, okay, so that makes sense. That's what melody is. That's what a chord is. And always constantly having access to, like, when it comes to like schooling, I had access to a Chromebook, and when I was supposed to be, studying or using Quizlet or something like that, I would be on Soundtrap, just like discreetly producing and making music, having like one earbud in, wearing like a jacket or something, so the teacher couldn't really see what I was doing. And then, but I'm pretty sure the teacher knew something was up whenever it was like finals week. And, like, wait, he gets his homework turned in, but when it comes to testing, he needs a little help. But it seems as though he's always on his computer. What could he be doing? I think a couple of teachers found out that I was making music. They were kind of like cool with it. There's always that one teacher who's like, that's not what it's for. So, but I just kind of like force myself to always, work on music. I always try to find a way to work on music. If I was ever disciplined, like if my parents would take away, the keyboard from me, they would take away the power cord. That's what would make it work, because the keyboard would be right there, but they would just take the power cord, so I could never like hear it. So, but as soon as I went to like school, I would go to the piano room and just like work on piano, like during lunch or something like that. It's just,
you've always had the calling.
I really do believe that I'm just drawn to art. I really am. Beyond escapism, I just see art as a way to explain certain concepts, without having the understanding of like a philosopher or a doctor. You know what I mean? It's like I would like to be able to articulate, my perception the way, a lawyer can. But I as it stands right now, I just can't. But I know that we all feel the same emotions. So, and when I say that I know, it's just something that's based off of observation. We all feel hurt. We all feel, joy. We all feel sadness. But, rather than understand the psychology of it, I just know I'm just more sensitive to the feeling of it. And art is one of the most direct lines to interpreting that feeling. So,
absolutely.
Sorry if I'm like going off on like these like tangents, but this is something that I really do, love and take pride in.
Very passionate about it.
I try to be. I have my lazy days. Sometimes I'm like, man, I'm not feeling it right now. But it's always just in the back of my brain. It's always something like, oh, that would be a cool melody or something like that.
Did you ever take any of those productions you made on Soundtrap and put them online anywhere, like SoundCloud or like that? Yeah, there's this. It's actually the very first song that I ever posted publicly was made on Soundtrap. It's called Puppy Heartbreak. Oh. And at the time, and I will say this, like, major respect to me from the past, because I really appreciated the work that I put in at that time. But obviously, I still was very elementary in my understanding of how music is supposed to be made. But you could tell, like, I was still very much into melodies and catchy hooks. So Puppy Heartbreak has some strengths, but it also has some weaknesses. Its main weakness being that it was made on a school Chromebook. So, the quality, the fidelity isn't necessarily the best, but, I'm still proud of it. I think that's awesome. I'm gonna try to look for it.
It's really, if you just search up Puppy Heartbreak, actually, who's a sad boy instead of who's a good boy? Oh. It's like what you say like to a dog.
Yeah.
It's like, who's a sad boy, parentheses, Puppy Heartbreak by Micah. It'll be like the first. Because It's such a very specific title and a very specific name. So it's like, oh, this is that song.
Is it just some keys, or are you singing on it or anything?
Oh, it's the full package.
Okay,
it's
cool.
Drums, bass, ukulele even. Yeah, there's a ukulele in there. Not an actual ukulele, like, you were
hitting the Q
plug-in,
key.
Yeah, the Q key. I'm like, that kind of sounds like a ukulele. Yeah, I can make that work. But yeah.
Hi guys, my name is Robert and I am the creator behind Human Unfiltered. I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you for watching my video. I hope you're enjoying it and to tell you about 2 ways that you can support this project. The first is through a membership to my YouTube channel. Members get access to all of the photos that I take during the interview and after the interview, as well as some cool custom emojis that you can leave down in the comments. And the second way you can support my project is to buy merch like this. Human Unfiltered. It currently comes in 3 colors, black, mustard, and brick. And you can click on the link below to get yourself one of these pretty cool shirts. Thank you, and I'll return you to the video. So you are actually signed to a record label.
Yes. I signed to Columbia Records last year, around this time. Yes, and I signed for an album. That's what I've been working on since. I'm almost done too.
So how did that come into fruition? Were you sought out by an agent or like?
Yeah. My best guess of what happened, they saw the numbers. They saw, the metrics with TikTok and Instagram, and, so they were able to shoot me a message and shoot me an email. And, I do believe in like divine timing, and I do believe in like, not going to say predestination, but fate, because the amount of emails in my Gmail account, it's just, and after a certain point, you can't distinguish between spam or what's real. But I don't know. It just, the subject line stuck out with me, Columbia Records. So I'm like, I'm familiar with that term. I'm familiar with that name. So clicked on the email, and it was like, A&R guy, like, hey, I'm interested. I would like to get to know you. Feel free to contact me whenever. So he left his number. So I did a background check to, validate, see if he's credible. Come to find out he was. So gave him a call, and he was like, yeah, I representative of Columbia Records, and I would like to get to know you and, pretty much discuss the idea and the possibility of a, contract. So, and, we had the conversation, then the contract came, and my manager and I, we negotiated for like a good month, because, but we negotiated for a full month, and yeah, it felt as though once we came to an agreement, once we came to like the appropriate terms, I signed, and been signed since then, and I'm signed for an album, and it's been interesting. It's been a really interesting journey, to say the least, because it's one thing to be, an outsider viewing in with the label and industry and how that works, but now it's like I'm not going to necessarily say that I'm inside, but it's like, wow, it's like I'm no longer peeking anymore. It's like I can crack open the door and just, check it out. So
more doors are open to you.
More doors. Yes. There have been things that I've experienced that I would have never thought in 100 years I could never even conceive. So it's been a really interesting ride, but it pretty much started with A&R guy, like I said, noticing the metrics on TikTok and seeing the following and seeing that I already had, the numbers. So,
and this came off of some success you've had with a couple of your songs.
Yes. Before being signed, I had posted my album, Micah, my self-titled album, Micah, on SoundCloud, and initially no traction whatsoever. But once the traffic from the TikTok, when I started making like, comedic content, the traffic from those who were interested with the comedy kind of leaked over to the music. And because I had posted about my music on TikTok, and that's all it took was just that initial, spark. And people were like, oh my gosh, this guy who makes comedy, he also makes music, and, it's fairly decent. You know what I mean? It's certain songs like One on One, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
One on One, Paranoid, Midnight Walker. You know, those songs, people really gravitated towards those songs. And, you know, I never thought, I was just like, I'm going to put this on SoundCloud. You know, it's the most direct way to promote your music would be SoundCloud. Post a couple of songs on YouTube, and certain songs actually, when it comes to YouTube standards, like they actually received like moderate reception. Like there was like 17,000 views on a song that I had used like a YouTube beat for, Lust. And I'm like, what? Like, which tied it to my point earlier. It's like, you can't predict these things. You can't really, you can make your projections, but at the end of the day, it is really a coin toss. My apologies. A coin toss.
And so with TikTok, you were doing, you still do like some silly comedy videos, and so like, how did you get started doing that kind of thing?
That also dates back to my youth. You know, I remember my aunt, she let me have access to her old Samsung slide phone from 2009, and it had seemingly endless storage. Like I could just keep making 13-minute long videos, 2-minute long videos. So I would just like make videos on this. I had no internet service whatsoever. So I would just make these videos pretending that I was vlogging, and I would make like, you know, I would have like little short performances, like pretending to be Hulk, and I would use like all my toys to like build like entire like cinematic universes and things like that.
That's awesome.
But I remember when I got my first smartphone, Vine, if you remember that app Vine.
Oh yeah. I was on Vine.
It was out, and I wasn't allowed to have social media because when I was just way too young, and social media had no, you know, restraints whatsoever. There were no constraints, so my parents just figured stay away from social media. But me, you know, being the opportunist as, you know, that I was back then, you know, there was one day, it was like April Fool's Day back in 2016, very poetic. My parents had, you know, gone away for a while, and I just figured like, hey, I now have a smartphone, I have internet service, I'm going to make 20, 30 Vine videos with this, you know, with this small window. And I think Vine has, its website is now an archive. So I had to do some I have to do some like digging, but my videos from Vine era are still there. But what happened was Vine was shutting down. It was like 2016, so it was about to go away. And I remember right before it went away, I had made one video with a hashtag, because all of the other videos, I was just like, hey, this, that, but I didn't put a hashtag on the video. So there was no way for the video to be put into the algorithm, because it was back then, social media was very hashtag driven. But then the very last video that I made, it was like a hashtag impressions with Vincent, and Vincent, he's this impressionist back during that time, really good with impressions. And I did like this, you know, Barney Elmo conversation, and that video blew up, and I'm like, oh snap, you know. So I was already thinking like, how can I live this double life where I'm not allowed to have social media, but you know, the numbers don't lie.
I'm calling to you.
And I got my response. I got my answer with Vine shutting down. So there was always like this, I could have been a contender. You know what I mean? And I had an Instagram, and I tried to make skits on Instagram, but none of them really ever took off. It wasn't until 2020, December of 2020, when I had like made a TikTok for the first time.
It was during COVID.
Yeah, it was during COVID. And that was another pivotal moment of my life, was COVID, because I was in the house pretty much, you know, not doing anything. So I figured, you know, why don't I just, you know, hone in on my craft, which was music production. And I asked my, you know, parents like, hey, I would like a laptop if possible. And they were like, sure. You know, they bought me a laptop, and I'm like, thank you so much. And I was able to get like FL Studio, and immediately just started like producing. And like I said, it was during the time of the pandemic. So, you know, I was able to just work at it and practice for hours, you know, and, you know, during that time, the model was virtual school. So I was on my computer pretty much all day. So once school was out, just, all right, I'm gonna do my homework and then I'm gonna produce music. But 2020, like the end of that year, I had made like a TikTok, and the concept was really dumb. It was pretty much like, Steve Harvey's response, or like Family Feud having like the worst answers ever. And people really liked it. It was just weird. Like, people just found it funny. And so I began making more videos, and it was very inconsistent. Some videos would do really well, some videos wouldn't. And that was the case until 2024. 2024, just a little brief background. I stayed at a homeless shelter. I was at a homeless shelter for 8 months. So from late June of 2023 until February of 2024, I stayed at a homeless shelter. And near the end of my time, there at the homeless shelter, I was blessed with the job of being the sound guy at the homeless shelter's chapel, because it was a faith-based. It was funded by the Methodist Church, and so I was the sound guy for the chapel. But for the most part, not a lot happened there weren't a lot of meetings that I had to like oversee. So I was pretty much just in that booth the whole day. And I had like a smartphone and internet service. So I figured, why don't I just make, some TikToks? And I was really close to, like, I was this close to deleting TikTok. Because I just figured, like, I'm in a homeless shelter. I should be doing anything else, looking for a job, or at least trying to join like Job Corps, military. But right before I deleted TikTok, I had the username Ultre. I was going by Ultre because it just sounded cool. My thought process was, there's not a lot of O names out there, and Ultre means beyond in Italian. It was just very like pretentious, artistic, philosophy and things like that. But right before I was about to delete TikTok, I was like, I might as well change my name to what my name is, Micah Dailey White. And then I made a video, and then that video just blew up. Like, it was the biggest video like I've ever had at the time. And I'm like, but here's the thing, my thought process was, it's happened before. So, but then again, I'm like, what if I made another video? Then that video blew up.
Oh.
Then I'm like, third time's the charm. So I made one more. That video blew up. So then I'm like...
So you were getting a sign.
So I'm like, is this actually... So I'm like, okay, let me just make more videos. And the videos just... People really just like the 6-second short form Vine style content that I was so like spitefully like, I'm going to bring back Vine. You know what I mean? Like, it was taken from me prematurely. I want to get these ideas that I've pretty much like, I wouldn't necessarily say I've had in my head this whole time. It's not like I just had like a book of ideas from like middle school, but I don't know. It's like, there's a lot that happens in life that is so funny. And like, most of the premises of my videos are centered around that one friend. We always have that one friend who X, Y, and Z, that one friend who has every excuse as to why they do what they do, or that one friend who just never stops talking, you know what I mean? And so people just, they were able to relate to it, and it was pretty fun. It's been pretty fun. But like I said, that traffic from the comedy stuff, translated over to the music stuff, which now I'm starting to see numbers on SoundCloud, like, whoa, people were like, wow, this is a really interesting album, because like it's genre bending. There's like one song is very much like R&B, soul, New Jack Swing, and then another song is like Deftone style, like rock. And at the same time too, Henry, him and I, we collaborated with One on One, and
Great
Henry,
song.
Thank you so much. Henry had uploaded the song to, those digital, what are those called? DSPs? Streaming platforms like Spotify, Apple Music. And it was like his lowest performing song. It was just, when you check the metrics, it was like number whatever. However many songs he had, it was the last number, pretty much. And once the TikTok and the Instagram, once all of that started growing. And then I moved back to Kalamazoo. I moved back and I didn't have many contacts. So I called up Henry. I'm like, yo, guess who's back? Back again. He was like, you're lying. And so the very next day, he's like, you want to go you want to go to the local breakfast spot called my apologies, the local cafe called Crow's Nest. I'm like, sure. So, and he asked me pretty much similar questions that you're asking, like, what happened? Right? Because it's like, he was genuinely curious. And so I talked to him about it. And then, he had the idea of like, why don't we just promote one-on-one? Why don't we make like videos with your newfound, platform? And, he already had numbers too as well. It's like, what if we just combine both worlds and like see what happens if we try to promote our song? So we, had like an aggressive promotional, like, circuit, and, the results are what they are now. So one-on-one is almost at 10 million streams, and it's each very stream impressive. I'm very thankful for. It's a blessing because that song, really set the precedent for, last year. This was last year. It set the precedent for like what to expect, moving forward, being signed to a label. Having these numbers, like now it's like you're in it. So, but the thing about it is like Henry and I, we're aware too that, songs like that, we can't really, there's no formula because both of us, we both thought like, it's just a song. I remember vividly making one-on-one, like producing one-on-one thing like, oh, it sounds like Poison by Belle Biv DeVoe. Things like that. It has a very New Jack swingy feel. And people just like liked it. At the end of the day, we can only do so much as, an artist. The other aspect of it is the way the audience reciprocates, our art. And, people really liked it. And, so that's how it all came to be, like being signed to a major label, the background with the comedy, trying to bring everything up to date, to the present day. So, yeah.
Awesome. Was there any kind of strategy with trying to bring over the TikTok viewers to SoundCloud, or did that kind of happen organically?
It happened organically because before the TikTok that really blew up received any traffic, I had like 3 posts promoting the album on SoundCloud, but those posts didn't receive any like views or traction. But then when that video blew up, people who were coming to my page to look at that video, they probably did their research. They were like going through my like portfolio. They saw those 3 posts promoting the music and they were like, oh, snap, he makes music as well. And I had links to it too. So they clicked on the link and they're like, oh my gosh, people were like, this has to be on Spotify. This has to be on Spotify. Like, can you please put this on Spotify or Apple Music? And I'm like, I can. I don't know how though. But it's free. That's the way I kind of like justified it. It's like, but it's free. It's on SoundCloud and you can listen to it for free with ads. But people were just like, I will pay to listen to this on Spotify. And I was like, okay, I want to, I just, like I said, I don't really know how, but, being signed to the label, they helped out. But, I think it was eventually we were able to figure out how to put the SoundCloud project on, streaming platforms. But now that I'm signed, this next album is going to be under like Columbia Records, but I'm all for the collaborative effort. I feel as though better results are produced when you collaborate. So
different perspectives coming together.
Oh, yeah, most definitely, man. My favorite food is curry. And curry is pretty much many ideas and recipes. The beauty of curry is like there's so many types because it's a very versatile, food. And that's, in the weirdest way, that's how I see, quality. It's like, it only gets better if you collaborate with the right people. So, yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you spent some time in a homeless shelter. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So like I've mentioned, earlier, I've always pretty much found ways to like focus on the things that I was actually interested in, which was music and art. And that has caused some conflict, naturally with, parents and with my teachers because, school isn't supposed to be, a space for, making music when you're supposed to be like studying or, working on academics and trying to do the academic, trying to, go on an academic route on, making something for yourself, making, becoming something, right? And that struggle, carried over into my college years, and I will say this, like, growing up, all my years throughout elementary school, middle school, and high school, I was able to just kind of get by. I never felt as though I needed to try too hard. And I'm not saying like it's because, I have like supreme level intellect. It was just, one, it was just, I never was one to really strive for A's. I was happy with like B's and C's. But if I did get an A, I was like, shoot, I earned that A, right? But for the most part, I was pretty much fine with, getting B's and C's, even though I had the capability of getting A's. But that's just not where my heart was. My heart was with art. But when I go to college, you can't just get by in college. Those professors will read everything and they will grade everything off of like merit, and they will grade everything off of like if your work is of quality. So the translation was my work wasn't of quality. So I was struggling in school. At the same time, too, I was a very impressionable person. Like it didn't take much to, convince me to do something. So I would experiment with drinking and smoking and, taking psychedelic drugs such as like, some shrooms. At the same time, too, I was prescribed and put on Ritalin because I had like ADHD. But I would like abuse Ritalin. And so you can already tell that was just a recipe for disaster. Stress from not being able to keep up in school, wanting to please everybody and, being willing to compromise my own moral compass for the sake of, praise and approval. So inevitably, I experienced like a mental breakdown. One in which I had to take a break from school. I had to go on medical leave. And at the same time, too, my grandmother, who had learned, where my grandmother, whom like my love for art stems from, she had passed away in the middle of all of that. So I was just an emotional and mental wreck. And I did not want to go back home because I didn't want to bring that, to, my parents. I didn't want them to have to handle, my emotions, when I felt as though at the time I was just very ashamed, full of guilt, and full of just very confused and lost. I just didn't want to bring that into their household. So I was kind of like, I'm going to stay in Kalamazoo and, figure this all out. And I had couch surfed pretty much. I tried to look for a job, nothing. There weren't any prospects. So I was just kind of drifting for a couple of months. And, my parents gave me the ultimatum, either you go into trade school like Job Corps or the military, but you just can't come back home. And at the time, I just didn't understand, but to be fair, I was going back and forth. It's like, I should go back home. But then I was like, nah, I shouldn't. So they were able to decide for me. And I thank them that they did that because it pretty much forced me to like make decisions. For the first time in my life, I had to make decisions for myself because I'm an adult. I was 20. I wasn't like necessarily like an adult, yeah, like 21, but I was still an adult. And it's like, if I'm, cognitive enough, to understand, taking drugs, it's like, then I should be smart enough and intelligent enough to, experience life without like a safety net for the first time, but I was hesitant on joining the military, and I definitely, being the artist that I was like, I definitely didn't want to join like Job Corps either. So my aunt, who's a clinical therapist, and she's also like a social worker, she was able to, have conversations and meet up with, certain homeless shelter programs and transitional housing programs. And she was like, hey, you can if you come back to California, you can go here. So I took a road trip with some friends back to California, and I landed in this one transitional living facility where I stayed for a while, and then they transitioned me over to an actual homeless shelter located in Coachella, California, Coachella Valley Rescue Mission. And that is where I stayed for 8 months. And it was separated into 2 sections, the secular section, which was shorter, and the faith-based section, which was longer, and it was faith-based. And I'm a man of the faith. I try to practice, Christianity. So I chose that one, and it was there that I was able to really dig deep within, my own personal, experiences, my own traumas, have conversations with guys who at first I was like, there's just that age difference. I was like the youngest person at the homeless shelter in my respective program. Everybody else was like 40, 30, 50 plus. And, they were guys who they've lived life. You know what I mean? So I figured it's like, I'm just going to be out of here soon. And, this is going to be just a little hiccup. And, I'm going to be here for like 2 weeks. And then 8 months passed by. I love those guys. I tried to do my best to keep in contact with them because, it was like they had this ultimate desire. They saw me and they saw that they were just like, they always agree, like, man, you're still young, man. So you can get out of this and not feel as though, you'll ever be back, So I have nothing but love for those guys. But, being at that homeless shelter, it taught me discipline is okay. It's okay to, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel. It's okay to break down. It's okay, to be honest too. That's something that was the biggest. That was something that was of the most benefit for me, was being honest, not with others, but with myself. And when I was able to finally be honest with myself, like I said, I'm a man of the faith. I believe that it was like God's way of finally allowing himself, it was finally a way for him to come into my heart and things like that. And, like I said, it's and it was also the space in which I was able to make those TikTok videos. So it was what's that phrase with that one popular candy, Sour Patch Kids? It was sour, sweet, and gone. You go to the homeless shelter and it's like, oh my gosh, this is a real scary place. And then, you come out of it stronger than ever. It also helped me build a even more personal connection with music, because it's I'm at rock bottom, man. And then I'm listening to certain songs and I'm like, man, I'm starting to understand it now, because I was very idealistic when I was younger. When I say younger, I mean a couple of years ago, but I was very idealistic. I really only listened to pop music. I didn't really waste. I feel as though I'd be wasting time if I listened to, deeper songs or songs with more depth. But then, once I was at the homeless shelter and I started listening to that music, I was like, wow, this is the true power of music. Music can be there where you're at. And man, I just I kind of get emotional just thinking about it, because, I only have 10 fingers. There's only so much, and there's only 12 notes in music. And you would think that would be the most limiting thing, but it's wow, it's actually the most freeing, because at the end of the day, it's it all comes from the mind, and it all comes from the heart, and it all comes from, the powers that be, that, the powers beyond us. And it's a very cool world to be in. And I'm just glad that I'm able to even perceive that, you know what I mean? Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking anybody's experience, but it's I've met those who are just yeah, I mean, it's music is music. And I'm are you hearing this song? And your conclusion is that's a pretty good song. You know what I mean? For me, my favorite line from any song whatsoever comes from Sam Cooke's Change Is Gonna Come. When he says, it was just so powerful. He says, it's been too hard living, but then he's but I'm afraid to die. And it's just this ultimate struggle that humanity has always had with, oh, I'm going through it. But at the same time, too, it's like, what's after this? What comes after this? And, you have the conversations of religion and science, and we have our like theories, but at the end of the day, no one knows. So that's what makes life all the more beautiful. And, it just helps, when I'm able to have like a space where I can like talk about this, because at the end of the day, I know when I was at my lowest point, I was looking for somebody or something that could like, that I felt as though understood where I was. And now I think it's my chance to give back. The Bible says, freely you've received, freely give. So I'm not saying, I'm doing that. I'm just practicing that, because at the end of the day, results don't lie. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. What a great story. Thank you.
Yeah.
So where do you see your music going? I mean, you're in the middle of recording an album.
Yes. Yes. It's a good question. I'm actually I'm truly optimistic about it. Like, there have been some trial and error. There have been some trial and tribulations along the way. But at the end of the day, it's like, I'm glad that I have like a focus group with the people that I surround myself with. Like, one thing that I really did not want to do was surround myself with yes men. Like, people who would just be like, that's great. That's great. There's nothing wrong with it. I wanted to be challenged, because I'm really into pruning, trying to extract the best out of anything that I like present to like this team. Right. So, and the simple fact of the matter is I'm pursuing pop. So there's a part of me that's like, as long as the melody is cool, and as long as it's catchy, then I truly feel as though the odds of the song, reaching certain audiences might be a tad bit higher, because people like catchy, you know what I mean? Like, M by Hanson. Like, are you kidding me?
Love that song.
Like, don't get me wrong. It's like, that song is one of the corniest songs ever, but I can't deny how just dang catchy it is, man. It's just so... I mean,
even if you don't really dig pop like that, you still find yourself,
you can't help it,
nodding your head or tapping your toe to it.
But at the same time, too, it's like, if you really want to understand why pop is as, catchy as it is, you have to understand all it means is popular music. It's like, well, what is popular music? And then that's where my love for history is of much benefit, because I'm listening to, Stevie Wonder. I'm listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire. I'm listening to Jimi Hendrix and Sting, James Brown. I'm just trying to absorb all of the ubiquitous, the music and the art that is ubiquitous with American culture. That's just a part of the general American zeitgeist. And I'm not going to say there's a through line, but there are constancies. There are constants, like within, the realm of music, that anytime an artist uses those constants, it helps them. You know what I mean? Like, some dude can just be like, I'm gonna use a disco beat, nice guitar, and I'm gonna just, have a melody line similar to September, and people will just like it. You know what I mean? And we see that all the time. And so, in connection to where I see my music going, pretty far. Lord willing, I would like it to go pretty far. Because at the end of the day, it's like, you go, when people ask me like, what do you want to do? Or if people ever ask me like, what's your mission statement? It's found in my Spotify bios. Like, I'm just an aspiring peacemaker. You know what I mean? Because music is like I said, is a very powerful tool. It's a very powerful force. One that has been used to change minds. Like, songs can change minds. Songs can provide perspectives that you never even considered, because at one point it's like, information was only accessible to those who like were literate, right? But then it's like, you listen to blues and it's like, wow, this is a entirely new emotion that I kind of understood I had, but I didn't know how to translate it. But then you listen to like B.B. King, it's like, wow, this is actually that emotion. And there are words for it too, jazz even. Jazz is, for the most part, jazz is, without vocals, but the music, the way it's played, it's you get it, you feel the pain. You feel, even in the happiest songs like Motown, people forget like they were making that happy music during the time when they weren't even allowed in certain venues where their music was being played. And that is like musicians and artists, when it comes to the hierarchy of society, you have like the king, then you have like the working class, or like you have the labor class or the slave class. Musicians have like had this weird, like artists and musicians have had this weird like way of being able to like climb up or down those ladders. And it's a real fascinating thing.
Yeah.
One that I'm like, that I probably will never fully understand. I just know it's a cool world to be in. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like the people that I've met and the conversations that I've had, simply because I like, have some very little understanding of music, but the conversations that I've had, it's like, wow, I understand this perspective because this song talks about this very thing. You know what I mean? It's a whole language. When people say like music is a whole language, it's like, it really is. It's beyond just music theory. It's an actual way of perception. And I mean, my gosh, look around us. You know what I mean? There's so many perspectives in life. And, I would like to travel the world, but until then it's like this, social media, this, this is how I get my information about what's happening or what has happened,
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
How would you like your music to be perceived, and what do you hope that you can accomplish with your music? It's kind of a heavy question.
It's a good question though. I would like my music to be perceived just as it is music. But like ultimately I'm noticing that music is very faction and very like fractured now. And one thing that I've always been so drawn to is genre bending or becoming genreless with genres. Like I said, my biggest inspiration, Childish Gambino, Michael Jackson. And it's like they could only put Michael Jackson's music as pop because when you decode his songs, there was R&B, rock, soul, funk in one song. That's.
Oh yeah.
I mean, would he have been the king of pop if he had just like made like, I don't know, like R&B? You know what I mean? It's just that I love blending. I just love the idea of like putting two and two together and making something completely new out of it. And that applies across not just like with music, but like old concepts, old philosophies with new philosophies. I'm like, what's the middle ground between both?
Yeah, I love that.
Finding balance, moderation, finding that middle ground. Because I don't think anything when it comes to art is objective, but I think that there's like a bullet point, and then there are things that are like close. They're like closer around the objective, like, but then there are things that are like kind of farther away. But at the end of the day, it's all connected though.
Yeah.
And yeah. And I'm just crazy about music.
I love it. Well, thank you, Micah. This has been a great interview.
This has been a really great interview. I love this. Shout out to you, man. I appreciate you. I really hope that this goes far.
Thank you.
I really pray that this goes far.
Where can people find your stuff?
It helps to have a name that is, kind of weird. People have said one of my biggest. Here's a really cool, like, personal fact. Like, one of my biggest insecurities was my very own name, because I figured, like, one, I pursue pop, and my name is Micah, so my brain is like, that's too close to Michael. and I also take inspiration from the guy too. But I remember asking myself, who's going to buy a Micah Dailey white ticket? You know what I mean? That's why I went by Old Trade for so long. But apparently people will actually purchase a Micah Dailey white ticket. And I'm like, that is a very surreal feeling. But everything is in the connections, like my, socials, everything is Micah Dailey white, pretty much. MICAHDAILEY, and then white as in, the color or the absence of WHITE. So you can find me on Spotify that way, Apple Music that way, all of my socials. It's Micah Dailey white.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Yeah, of course.